Okay.
Okay, now it says broadcast is live. Hello, my name is Talip Küçükcan. I welcome you to the TRT World Forum and Digital Debates. Today we are going to look at US presidential elections and we will try to compare and contrast Trump and Biden. Today I have Matthew Bryza as our guest. Thank you for joining us, Matthew. You are the right person to talk about US politics. Let me introduce you to our audience before we start. Matthew Bryza is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a board member of the Jamestown Foundation in Washington, D.C. He was the director of International Center for Defense and Security in Tallinn, Estonia, from 2012 to 2015. During 23 years as a U.S. diplomat, his assignments included the following. Many places, actually. Ambassador to Jordan, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Director on the National Security Council staff of the White House, political officer in the U.S. missions to Russia, and the political officer in the U.S. mission to Poland. He is actually currently resides in Istanbul and serves as a board member and executive in energy and environment service companies. Matthew, thank you very much for joining us. Let me begin with a question on the Trump's COVID-19 test being positive recently. Although he is discharged from the hospital, I think there is still a debate. How it is seen, I mean, how we should interpret it, whether he is brave enough or maybe he's a careless person that he got COVID-19, how that will play out in the campaign.
Yeah, Talib, thank you so much for letting me be here with you. And we were just recalling how we had worked together years ago as well, earlier in my diplomatic career. And I should also begin by saying I am nonpartisan. I was a career diplomat, so a career civil servant. I began the ascent in my career under President Clinton, working on oil and gas pipelines from Azerbaijan to Turkey, and then really had a great time working directly on the staff of President Bush, a Republican in the White House. And then I was appointed by President Obama, a Democrat, to be ambassador to Azerbaijan. So I am apolitical. Now, your question is one that really is the important one of the day. And I have to say, as an American or just as a human being, President Trump's behavior really angers me. But it doesn't matter what it does to me. I think a lot of Americans are angry. His base is maybe 35, 36% of the American voters, and they will always vote for him. He could do anything and they will vote for him. He himself jokes that he could probably shoot a person in New York's Times Square and he wouldn't go to jail because he has this group of fanatical supporters. So they don't care. Those people love what he did. They believe that the coronavirus is not so serious. They believe that the Democratic Party has been pretending it's more serious than it actually is just to hurt President Trump. They believe whatever President Trump says about the coronavirus. But the rest of America thinks differently. Yes, there's a large chunk of American voters who will dislike anything President Trump says. Even people in the Republican Party, there's a whole group called the Never Trumpers. And there are many people that I worked with at the White House and back at the State Department. I'm not a member of that group, but there's a larger number of people in the middle. And this is where the election is going to get decided. These undecided people who may not love Joe Biden, who think he's maybe not so strong, but are not comfortable with a lot of President Trump's behaviors. And this one you just mentioned is costing President Trump support in the middle. The latest poll I saw today, it was a CNN poll of likely voters. So those are the people who have an opinion. Went from an advantage last week of Biden over Trump of 8% to 16% now. It's the biggest it's been. So it seems like his behavior has lost support in the middle. And I think what really bothered people was, one, that he first said, I understand now, this is a serious illness. I get it. And I know from experience, not just from reading in books. So he made people think, okay, he's going to take it seriously now and lead by example, wear a mask and help people understand what to do to protect themselves. But then on Monday, he did a car ride around the hospital where he was being treated, Walter Reed Medical Center, U.S. Army, to wave at his supporters, which could have contaminated his Secret Service people that were driving the car. And then the next day he left the hospital and made a point of walking up the outdoor stairs at the White House and taking off his mask. And then he subsequently has said, don't let the coronavirus frighten you. Don't let it dominate you. We have the best medical care in the world and we can beat it. So I think that reckless approach is hurting him right now.
Well, thank you very much, because you have said, I mean, that is also a good clarification that you are a apolitical person. That's why I said you are the right person to talk to, actually. I mean, that's what we expect from our guests.
Thank you.
Now, let's assume that Trump has won the elections. That's an assumption. What would 4 more years under President Trump would look like? Do you think he will change, some of his positions, or he will consolidate his legacy and try to follow the same path as he did in the last 4 years?
Yeah, Talib, that's a very thoughtful question. That it is the one that should be asked to any president at a moment of maybe getting a second term. But it's extremely difficult to answer when it comes to President Trump, because I don't think he knows what his legacy is in general. He's been so erratic. He's gone from one extreme to the other on policies, both domestic and foreign. And one just happened today. There's a big debate going on inside the US Congress over how much money or whether to provide a whole bunch of money additionally to the American people and American companies to help them get through the COVID-19 pandemic. And the Democrats have been arguing for a large number, $2.4 trillion additional dollars, after about $4 trillion have already been provided. The Republicans were saying, no, maybe half of that. So they were arguing about it. And in the meantime, airlines are saying we're going to have to lay people off of their jobs. And 100,000 people have lost their jobs because the agreement wasn't reached within Congress. And these people lose their health care protection as well in the middle of a pandemic. So everybody was thinking, okay, the president will come back from the hospital and he'll bring the two sides together and say, we've got to get the money to keep our people with their health care, to keep our people in jobs, and to keep our companies strong. And instead, yesterday, he said, nope, we're not going to provide any more money. I'm going to end the negotiations between my presidential team and the Congress, and we'll take up this issue of helping the American people economically after the election. But then today, he totally reversed course. He said, you know what? We do need to provide, okay, $1 billion or so, $1,200 per American worker so they can get through this period. And then we also need to give a bunch of money to the US airlines so they can survive. So on every policy issue, pretty much he's gone in one direction and then back, in one direction and back. He began his administration saying, we're going to cut the debt, and we're going to create tax cuts. So we're going to give back companies money, and we're going to invest a huge amount of money in infrastructure in the United States, and we're going to build the border wall between Mexico and the US. The border wall hasn't happened. The tax cuts did happen, but the debt is growing larger and larger to record numbers. And the infrastructure project never happened. So I think the one legacy we'll see if he's reelected is judges. He has understood that in the Obama administration, the Republican leader of the Senate blocked the appointment of 150 or so judges to various courts, not just the Supreme Court, which they blocked, but also to the appellate courts. So it's like the Danishtai, which is the circuit courts, and other district courts. So there were 200 or so vacancies in the courts when President Trump became president, and his top priority, and that of the upper house of parliament, the Senate, has not been to get that emergency money to American people. It's been to fill those judge positions, because the judges get their positions for life. And then if there's an argument in the Congress, if people can't agree, then the courts will decide. So he's coming up with a way to get his extreme Republicans to control courts all throughout the US system, and then perpetuate Republican control without a clear idea of what he exactly would like to accomplish. The bottom line is he doesn't, I think, really have a vision. He doesn't have a clear economic vision. What he wants to do is promote himself. But the last point I have to say, and I'll be very brief, is he has been undermining the system as we know it, the democratic system of the United States. How? He's calling into question whether or not our electoral system is honest, and whether or not, if he loses, as he says, if he loses the presidency, you know that it was a false election, that the election was rigged illegally against him. He suggested he may not leave the White House if he loses. He may stay in the White House. He may challenge an election result he doesn't like in the courts. This has never happened in American history with a US president undermining the democratic system. So my fear is if he's reelected, that will continue, and US democracy will be much weaker 4 years from now.
Matthew, it seems that the COVID-19 is a game changer, not only in the United States of America, but also in other countries, because it has an impact on economy, very, very, very heavy impact. In many places, there's a recession, unemployment is rising, etc. And I think U.S. Also takes its part in that. So I just follow on this because it seems that the Trump will follow a similar, path. Sometimes he will be consistent. Sometimes he will be contradicting himself. But now let's look at the other candidate. The damage done to the U.S. economy and to American lives, huge. 200,000 people lost their lives and millions are now infected. Do you think that the Biden administration would be able to shift this course to a significant extent and reverse the course that the American economy and the public is going through these days? Do you think he could prevent further damage to the U.S. economy and human lives if he wins?
I think yes, not so much because of his economic policies, because I actually think they're going to end up being quite similar to President Trump's. Maybe there won't be the tax cuts, but there will be a huge amount of spending that will raise the U.S. national debt up toward a dangerous level. The estimate I saw from a U.S. think tank that follows the national debt today, just today, was that their best estimate is if Trump is, well, today the U.S. national debt is 98% of gross domestic product, so 98% of the size of the entire economy. If Trump is reelected, and if you look at his economic policies, the debt will be up to 125% of gross domestic product. And if Biden is elected, his policies would probably lead to about the same, 128%. The debt will be at of gross domestic product, so way bigger than our annual economy. So their economic policies, I think, will be similar. A President Biden would want to invest in infrastructure in a way President Trump had intended but didn't. President Biden will invest a lot in research and development and education, and President Trump might as well. Where the big difference will be is in fighting the pandemic. I think almost all economists agree that everyone in the world's economy is going to be weak until the pandemic is defeated. President Trump has no plan to defeat the pandemic. I mean, it's clear he's pushed the responsibility to governors and to mayors, and he even disbanded, actually, the Obama administration's office in the White House, designed to combat global pandemics. When he came into office, he eliminated it. Biden, on the other hand, will have a plan to combat the pandemic. The plan will involve testing on a massive scale, which Trump has not done. He's left it up to the states and municipalities. It'll involve tracing. It'll involve, I think, a more rigorous effort to make sure that medical professionals and vulnerable people have the protective equipment that they need. And I think he'll have an overall strategy on how to bring together all the pieces of U.S. government, federal, local, state, and the countries of the world as well, to defeat the pandemic. And so until the faster we defeat it, the quicker our economies will be able to recover. So I think that'll be the core of the difference between Biden and Trump.
Right. I think the second question that I will raise with regard to Biden's difference from Trump will be on Black Lives Matter issues. Now, the United States democracy, was very strong in terms of providing a space for, social movements, civil rights movements, etc. But also we have seen that, especially in recent years, there is a debate on populism and racial inequality and then violence on the street. Do you think the Biden would have a different policy towards African Americans or people of color? How it would be different from today and also from the previous administrations like Obama, Clinton, and other Democrats?
Yeah, I think there will be differences in all of those things. First of all, Biden's approach will be more intense, I think, than Obama's or Bill Clinton's, because, as you said, this Black Lives Matter movement it brings the debate on racial inequality and systemic racism in police forces, but throughout American society, to a whole new level. Until this, George Floyd was killed by the police officer in St. Paul, Minnesota, I think most Americans thought, okay, there's still racism in U.S. society, but it's not systemic. It's getting better. I know people who have gone to the best universities and are running the big corporations, and it must be exaggerated. The Black Lives Matter movement must have been exaggerated when a few years ago another young man was killed by police in Missouri. Now that's changed. Now I think most Americans recognize, or believe at least, wow, there is a problem of systemic racism throughout the U.S. that has to be not only recognized, but fought. So that's different from Clinton, and certainly from Obama, even though he was African American or half black. He's half white, half black, but he identifies largely as being black. He began his presidency saying, we're beyond race. A black man has been elected president. Let's get beyond racial differences and let's work for America and make America strong, but let's create peace in the world. Now with Black Lives Matters, that complacent approach is no longer possible. President Trump is on the other extreme. President Trump actually stokes racism. He encourages racism. He's been called out more and more now as a racist. Michelle Obama yesterday called him a racist for the first time. He has said when there were white supremacists demonstrating against democracy and racial equality advocates in Charlottesville, Virginia a few years ago, instead of condemning the white supremacists, President Trump said, well, there are good people on both sides. And then last week when he debated Vice President Biden, when Biden said, will you condemn white supremacists? He said, well, who's a white supremacist? Name one group. And then he wouldn't condemn that group. So President Trump is on the other extreme. He's saying there is no systemic racism in America. And in fact, he's encouraging white supremacists. My last point, you may recall that in the early spring, I guess in April or so, maybe in May, there was a protest by white supremacists with rifles and automatic weapons inside the capital of the state of Michigan. And so they were threatening the governor, suggesting they might use weapons against her because they wanted her to eliminate the restrictions on the economy. And President Trump tweeted, "Liberate Michigan." So he was supporting these white supremacists, not saying, calm down. You should never have these serious weapons in the US legislature or a state legislature. So there will be huge differences. And the last point is, so I said last point, but there really is a last point. Former Vice President Biden has actually been very tough on crime throughout his time as a senator. He has taken pride in sponsoring every major piece of legislation in the United States Senate that has been tough on crime. And those anti-crime bills have disproportionately led to the jailing of Black Americans. So a lot of Black Americans wonder whether Biden is really maybe too tough on them. And also Kamala Harris, who's his vice presidential candidate, is also seen as having been very tough on crime when she was Attorney General of California. So the Trump administration has been skillful in using the issue of fighting crime against Biden, saying either he's against the police, he wants to take money away from the police, or sometimes saying he's been too tough on Black Americans in fighting crime.
Well, thank you, Matthew. I think racial inequality and discrimination is yet another pandemic. It's all over the world.
Yeah.
I mean, and one part of it is anti-Semitism, the other part is Islamophobia. I think we see all, such attitudes, especially among the populist politicians and populist, let's say, intellectuals and media circles, and that is not really helping us in terms of, cooperating and cooperation. So this will, I think, remain as one of the important topics in the U.S. domestic politics, and it will be impacting the maybe outcome of the elections. Now let's move on to a little bit, foreign policy issues. Whether we will see a shift under Biden's administration, if that happens to be. With regards to the Middle East peace process, that's what I would like to start with. It is unlikely that the U.S. under a Biden presidency would seek to undermine the normalization deals between Israel and the UAE, as we see, and also Bahrain joined the club. Do you see a future President Biden applying pressure on other Arab states to normalize ties with Israel, to expand the, let's say, the peace struggle between Israel and the Arab world? Because now there are only two countries. Maybe there might be some other countries if Biden pushes that further.
Yes, another very thoughtful question. I think part of the answer will be in a second. I'll say that I don't think Biden has decided. But to answer the first part of your question, I agree with you. I think it's impossible for any U.S. politician to be against any breakthrough agreement that makes Israel seem like it's going to be more secure. That's political suicide. So there's no way he'll push for the UAE or Bahrain agreements to be overturned. Whether he will push for other Arab states to normalize relations with Israel depends upon what his approach to the Middle East peace process will be. Reading through some recent articles, in fact, a great one that he himself wrote for Foreign Affairs Journal, one of the premier journals on foreign policy, he has one line on Israel, nothing about the peace process and nothing about the Palestinians, which is interesting. I say it's interesting because he's a very traditional U.S. foreign policy thinker who believes in our alliances, in NATO, in democracy, in working together with other countries, which would make you think he's going to go back to the traditional Democrat and Republican, but Middle East peace process that was really launched by his predecessor a few times removed, Democrat Bill Clinton. But I haven't seen him make any statements on that so far. All he has, like in that Foreign Affairs article, is a statement that we must be steadfast friends and supporters of Israel, which every U.S. presidential candidate has to say. But I know he means it. I mean, he had some of his most brilliant foreign policy thinkers were actually quite prominent in the American Jewish community. So there's, he has genuine affinity for Israel, but he's also a strategic thinker. So I think he's trying to figure out how to play the Middle East peace process after President Trump has sort of taken the game board and shaken it completely and maybe broken the entire former process. So I think he's going to need time to figure out what to do in terms of Israel's relations with the rest of the Arab world, especially with the Palestinians.
I think you have underlined an important issue that it will be suicidal for American politicians to undermine the security of Israel. That is one case. But also, while talking about the Middle East, U.S. policies in the Middle East, there is Syria, there is Lebanon, there is Libya over there, and there are some unfolding developments in the Middle East, and that have some sort of impact on the Israeli security. Do you think Biden administration would have different ideas about the Middle East, whether to remain in the Middle East as a strong actor or withdraw from the Middle East as Obama and Trump have done?
Because he's such a strong believer in traditional U.S. foreign policy and working with allies, my guess is he will want the United States to be present in a serious and influential way, but definitely not in terms of large-scale military deployments. He is actually as critical as President Trump is of so-called forever wars, like the U.S. involvement in Iraq or in Afghanistan. So what former Vice President Biden advocates, and he did this as vice president too, is reduce the number of U.S. troops in Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria. I mean, there's just a small number in Syria, right? And rely on remote targeting through unmanned aerial vehicles as much as you can, and special forces, with the special forces doing or conducting precision operations, basically hunting down terrorists is the way I think he looks at it, and hopefully relying on other allies. But relying on the special forces as well. The other mission of special forces is to train local countries' militaries in high level precise tactics. So I think he'd like to go back to that approach, which is it's kind of like foreign policy in a less expensive way, both in terms of lives and budgetary expenditures. And if you think back to the way NATO was thinking back before Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014 and annexed Crimea, the doctrine of NATO then was called smart defense, or doing less with more. It was all about pooling all the resources of the various allies, figure out what task can Latvia perform, what task can the Czech Republic perform, what does the US need to do, and make more efficient use of the economic resources as well. I think that's what he'll want to do in the Middle East. Yeah, but how the US will behave in Syria, I think will be much different than President Trump. I mean, it'll be back like Trump before last October. I think Biden is going to want the US to work with the YPG. And we can get into that in a second. It bothers me very much. In Libya, I don't know what his policy would be. I mean, President Trump has gone up and back between supporting Haftar and the government of national accord. I haven't seen any clarity in the Biden administration on what that will be.
All right. Talking about Middle East again, I just would like to come to a point where the U.S. foreign policy in the past seen the promotion of democracy as a priority in the region. I mean, through different means. And what we have seen here the rise of Arab democracy, which turned out to be Arab winter later on. And also we have seen some counter-revolutionary, activities like, Sisi took over militarily in Egypt. What would be the possible, let's say, policy of Biden's administration as far as promotion of democracy, promotion of human rights are concerned in the region?
That's a more complex question than you think. Promoting democracy and human rights will be a cornerstone of if there were a Biden presidency and globally. I mean, one of the things he wants to do early on in his administration is to call a summit of democratic leaders. So like-minded countries that he sees as being democratic will come together and figure out how to strengthen democracy, both inside their own countries, because that's a big part of President Biden's vision, is just to re-strengthen U.S. democracy, but also abroad. But the Middle East is a special case. Because President Obama's predecessor, George W. Bush, as you were suggesting there, Talib, made such a point of trying to make democracy happen, if you will, whether it be in Iraq or Afghanistan or even in Israel-Palestine. And so in the beginning of the Obama administration, their mantra was, don't do that. In fact, Susan Rice, who was the National Security Advisor and UN ambassador before that, she had a mantra, don't do stupid stuff. It was a 4-letter word that began with S, but you know what I mean. And they believe that trying to compel Middle Eastern countries to become democracies what was a stupid thing to do. So I think if there were a President Biden, he will be torn. He doesn't want to repeat the mistakes of the Bush administration, but he very much believes that the U.S. is stronger when there's more democracy in the world and when the U.S. is united with fellow democracies.
Matthew, you said that he will invite like-minded leaders in the world to have debates on the critical issues that we face today. That reminds me of the discussion about multilateralism and unilateralism, because when Trump started his campaign in 2016, I think he said America first. What would be Biden's position as far as multilateralism is concerned and the reaction to this America first concept?
America's stronger together with its allies. When it comes to China, for example, what former Vice President Biden often says is, yes, China is a threat, both militarily because of what it's doing in the South China Sea with its artificial islands, technologically with Huawei, he recognizes that, and in general, technologically, because from his perspective, China is stealing U.S. technology. And as he likes to say, why should the U.S. be falling behind China? We have the greatest research universities in the world. We developed all of this stuff in the beginning. Why is China passing us? So that sounds like Trump. But what Biden also says is the way we make America stronger is together with our allies. So instead of doing what President Trump did, which is to have a trade war simultaneously, not only with China, but with the European Union, to a certain extent with Turkey, with Canada, with Mexico, what Biden says is, no, we have to come together. We have to have trade agreements with our allies and like-minded democracies. And only then, from a position of strength, should we try to take on China, which is a mighty economic power. Don't divide your strength, regain your strength together, and then try to tackle China on trade.
So would you suggest that Biden will be softer on China, Iran, and Russia compared to Trump? If
No, yeah, go ahead, please. Tom.
Yeah, that's my question actually. Basically, how different he would be, because the Iran is one of the major security threat as perceived by the U.S. and by Israel, and whether he will follow the similar path. And on China, Trump was very tough time to time, and you remember the tariffs and all the other things. Even he was calling COVID-19 as a Chinese, disease. So how Biden would be different than Trump if he is going to be?
President Trump still does call it the China virus. Yeah. So let's start with that. With China, I think Biden will be tough on China. He likes to tout how difficult he's tried to make life for China when it's been breaking the rules, but he won't be belligerent and he won't be erratic as Trump has been. Yeah, he would never call it the China virus. He would never say China's to blame. And he will not pursue a trade war with China just for the sake of looking strong, which I think is what President Trump has done. And that damages the US economy and the Chinese economy and the global economy. No, I think what he's going to do, as I was saying before, is he's going to try to force China to play by the international rules by creating an alliance with our allies, and then together pursue penalties through the World Trade Organization and through other mechanisms if China continues to break the rules. So he won't be soft on China, but he won't be belligerent, and he won't pick a fight just for the sake of picking a fight. On Russia, he will be, I think, much stronger than President Trump. In the United States, the conventional wisdom is President Trump has this special like of Vladimir Putin, and that he is soft on Putin. And people wonder, is it because Trump has done business in Russia that maybe Putin has some leverage over him, either financial or some sort of intelligence information about the way President Trump behaved in Russia? In any case, Vice President Biden, he spearheaded the U.S. efforts to constrain and contain Russia and punish Russia for its invasion of Ukraine in 2014 and its annexation of Crimea. That was one of Vice President Biden's special projects, to develop the U.S. sanctions regime and then work with European allies to have their own sanctions regime together with us as one team. I personally worked with Vice President Biden when he was a senator in Russia, on Russia, and I know how sharp his views are. It's NATO first, whereas President Trump said maybe NATO's obsolete. Biden says, no, NATO first, that's the cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy interests. And Russia has to be deterred from its military adventurism, be it in Syria or Libya, which is good for maybe U.S.-Turkey relations if there's a vice president or President Biden. But there's a flip side we'll talk about, I think, in the next question, where he might not be so good for U.S.-Turkey relations. Finally, on Iran, I do think he'll be soft. I think that, I know that if he's elected president, one of the first things he will do is return the United States to the JCPOA, so the so-called Iran nuclear agreement, the joint comprehensive plan of action. And I am critical of the Obama administration for having put the reaching of that nuclear agreement ahead of many other foreign policy interests, leading them to be often, at least Obama, too soft on Russia, in my opinion, because then President Obama didn't want to jeopardize relations with Iran, and he wanted Russia to be supportive. So I think that's the mentality that Biden has when he comes to the Iran issue, or dealing with Iran. And one of his things he wants to do too is end U.S. support for Saudi Arabia's involvement in the war in Yemen. And so that can be seen as being a pro-Iran approach as well.
Okay, well, thanks for the insights that you shared with us. Now, of course, we are coming towards the end of our debate. Let's spend some time on Turkey-U.S. relations and how that will be shaped under Biden if he becomes the president. Because during the Trump era, we had ups and downs, but this S-400 issues, PYD, YPG issues, Syrian policy. I mean, we had a lot of differences. And I think that was not very constructive in the last 4 years. What would be your views on the future if Biden comes to power?
Yeah, I think if he comes to power, in the beginning, for sure, it's going to be a rockier road, a more difficult road than under President Trump. It's clear President Trump likes President Erdogan. They get along. President Trump, I think it's respect for a strong leader, but I think he actually just likes President Erdogan. And clearly, based on what candidate Biden said at the end of last year, those derogatory remarks about wanting to see a democratic path to removing President Erdogan, I was shocked when I heard that. That is utterly inappropriate to say that about a democratically elected NATO allies leader. That is not right. And regardless of what I think, I'm sure everybody in Turkey thinks that's not right. Even a lot of people who may not be fond of President Erdogan. That's insulting that a U.S. president would say that about a democratically elected leader, no matter how much criticism you may make about Turkey's democratic shortfalls, whatever they are. That's not appropriate. So that's going to, right in the beginning, there's going to be distrust. The other difficulty, I think, is going to be anything having to do with Kurds. So in Syria, I think he's going to be supportive of the YPG and its or at least its continuing alliance with the United States, as wrong as that is. And I go back to shortly after the last war in Iraq. When everybody remembers that he was a senator, right? He's famous for saying, suggesting maybe Iraq needed to be carved up into 3 cantons, one Kurdish, one Sunni, one Shia. So I think that's going to leave a residual or initial distrust also in Ankara's view of a Biden administration. But where I'm more optimistic is in the longer term. After you get through that first period, I know that a President Biden would again fall back on NATO as the core of U.S. foreign policy. And if NATO is your centerpiece, Turkey is your inevitable, indispensable partner and ally in the Middle East. I mean, as everyone knows, Turkey has the second largest military in all of NATO. Turkey's amazing drone capabilities are on display right now in Azerbaijan. And they were in Idlib, where Turkey's drone strikes fought the Russian military and the Syrian Assad regime to a standstill, and did the same in Libya with Russia's Wagner mercenaries. So given how much then Vice President Biden wanted to rely on drone strikes in Afghanistan and elsewhere in the Middle East, I think he's inevitably going to come back and see how valuable Turkey is as an ally.
Well, my last point is about his latest statement on Hagia Sophia. He called on the Turkish government to turn it to a museum or a church again, I think. A secular country like U.S., I mean, how do you see that kind of religious statements by the President Trump sometimes and by the Vice President Biden?
I find that purely domestic politics. With Trump, he knows that 40%, this is hard to believe, but 40% of U.S. voters are evangelical Christians. So, Christian fundamentalists, 40%. And 80% of those support Donald Trump. 80%, even though he's been such a womanizer and has said terrible things, misogynist, and clearly has got to answer a lot of questions about corruption and using his office to benefit his own companies. 80% of the so-called cleanest of the clean American Christians support him. So Trump knows that, and he uses religion accordingly. Same with candidate Biden. The Greek American, Cypriot American, and Armenian American communities are not huge in number, but they're very influential and they're very wealthy and really well organized. So I think candidate Biden is playing to them. He probably also, as a devout Catholic, a Christian, he probably has sincere feelings as well about the fact that, of course, Hagia Sophia was originally a church, a Byzantine church or a Roman church, if you will, but probably isn't fully familiar with the full depth of the debate and why it was and how it was that Ataturk turned it into a museum, and then why it is that so many Turkish people now are proud of their religious values. So I think that's a debate that will need to ensue, but it's domestic electoral American politics, I think, driving that.
Well, thank you very much, Matthew Bryza, former United States ambassador and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Thank you for joining us. Now we come to the end of our debate on the upcoming U.S. elections. We hope to see you in our next program. Bye-bye.